In this video, we'll discuss Moloch. This guy. The myths of work-life balance. Mariah Carey. And the solutions to finding your ideal job. But first, let's dive into the deep end as we discuss the Dark Lord Moloch. Topheth is Moloch, which was made of brass, and they heated him from his lower parts, and his hands being stretched out and made hot, they put the child between his hands, and it was burnt, when it vehemently cried out. But the priests beat a drum, that the father might not hear the voice of his son, and his heart might not be moved. These are the words of medieval French Rabbi Rashi, who wrote of Moloch, an infamous pagan god from the Bronze Age, who led its cult to sacrifice their own children by burning them alive in a brass statue. Historians debate whether or not Moloch and its cult ever existed, but there's no denying that it's quite a dark and relevant tale. I first heard of Moloch by watching a Lex Fridman podcast with Liv Bory. In it, Liv likened Moloch to game theory. Actual game theory, not the YouTube channel, which although is quite interesting, I think there is a more prominent semblance between Moloch and conventional work. But why? You might ask. Let's look at the numbers involving the hours of work for everyday people who hate their jobs. The average person will spend roughly 90,000 hours of their lives working, regardless of their passion for work. After the age of about 20, they will only have half of that time to leisure when we factor out sleep and non-financial duties, which will only grow if they decide to have kids. Many of these people have a rational fear of death and the fear of missing out, yet they also irrationally fear changing jobs they hate. This fear traps them in a state of limbo, convincing themselves they're making the right choices and exerting all of their energy to avoid losing their current position. This vicious cycle persists until they find themselves on their deathbed, joining around 12% of individuals, and particularly men, who regret overworking for a job that never brought fulfillment. Much like these individuals who convinced themselves they were doing the right thing, regardless of the cost, the followers of Moloch also believed in sacrificing their children as the only means to combat wars, fires, famines, and so on. In other words, both groups were so overwhelmed by fear, it led to a Pyrrhic victory. Their decisions made in fear would likely be regretted, leaving them burdened with immense guilt that could not be undone. I am aware that we depend on people to do terrible jobs, with even worse pay for civilization to function, maintaining sewers, paving roads, or even working in a supermarket. The fact is, however, civilization doesn't specifically need you to do any of these. We'll get to the solution in a bit, but for now we'll discuss why the act of work itself is paramount, and the other reasons work-life balance is unquestionably a myth.
I couldn't think of a more horrible job if I wanted to. And you have to do it. You have to, or I'll fire you. Do you understand?
The ironic thing about work-life balance is that it causes more stress than people claim it would reduce. This is because work-life balance has never existed and likely never will. Most people don't realize this, and so they stress themselves by pursuing this unreachable goal. But why is it unreachable? Not only do our responsibilities, both financial and otherwise, outnumber our leisure time, but the act of working itself is hardwired into our brains. For the past 6 million years or thereabouts since humans have been around, we've mostly been hunter-gatherers, up until around 12,000 years ago, when over time people started making farmlands and lived off their produce. Fast forward to today in our post-industrial world, where we can go 2 weeks to a month doing little more than sleeping, peeing, or eating Sonic limited edition curry. Before this though, humans actively had to go out to hunt animals, gather food, prepare food, and build shelters, or else they would die. Our ancestors passed down to us, and almost every other animal on the planet, neurotransmitters such as dopamine, which provides us with feelings of bliss, satisfaction, and motivation. This in turn rewards us to work indefinitely, fostering happiness, and ultimately our survival. As well as this, A dopamine deficiency punishes us for not doing work by making us feel bored, depressed, and worthless. This, in a nutshell, is why we thrive off work, so much so that we'd rather work in a terrible job, or even to be a literal slave, than do nothing at all. The problem with dopamine, however, is that it also rewards us for being exposed to positive stimuli and can't tell the difference between this and meaningful work. This explains why short-form social media platforms like TikTok are so addictive and eat away at our attention spans, leading to even worse problems down the line. On the flip side, people go insane when subjected to extreme forms of sensory deprivation, such as with white room torture. It's no surprise then that researchers have found leisure periods greater than 5 hours to lead to boredom and despair for the average person. Ultimately, it comes down to this: there is no work-life balance. Work is life. And with that being said, this leaves us with two realistic options. Either we can find work that is fulfilling and makes us content, or we settle with an unfulfilling job that makes life only just bearable. You might be wondering, what type of job should I pursue exactly? And to that I present the solution: to be a professional passenger pusher. Only joking.
But now you have been promoted. You are now one of my elite employees. You missed some trash over there, honey. All right.
Ikigai is an ancient Japanese philosophy which roughly translates to reason for being. In other words, your life's purpose. As corny as it sounds, you need a good reason to live, as you've probably surmised. Ikigai can be traced back to Okinawa, back in the Heian period between 794 to 1185 AD, the region which also happens to have the highest proportion of people who are older than 100, and a place where Ikigai is strongly intertwined with their culture. This doesn't stand out until you realize there is a proven correlation between lifespan and quality of life. Ikigai can be summarized with the following Venn diagram. We see that it is divided into 4 circles, with each representing an important attribute. The first one is on doing what you love, the second on doing what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and finally, what you are good at. When all of these are at harmony with each other, you have found your Ikigai. If we look again at the diagram, we see that there are big triangles and small triangles near the center that represent the combinations of 2 circles and the combinations of 3 circles, respectively. In essence, these are combinations of Ikigai attributes that are missing 1 or 2 of the others, leading to caveats. For example, if we look at vocation, the result of combining what the world needs with what you can be paid for, a notable example is school teaching. While there is definitely a societal need for school teaching, the pay, though technically a living wage, often falls short considering the challenges teachers face in managing uncooperative and bratty students. Many teachers also experience overwhelm due to a hefty workload, often due to understaffing. Ergo, while teachers fulfill a societal need and are paid for it, they may not enjoy the job or feel proficient at it, thus not fulfilling Ikigai. I could provide a job example that does fulfill Ikigai, but the fact remains that it's somewhat subjective. The example of a school teacher I've provided doesn't apply to all teachers. There will be some teachers who are quite persuasive and can cooperate with their students well. Or they may be in a different country, like let's say Finland, where education is taken more seriously, and both the teachers and the students have real incentives to be there. There are also jobs that appear to align with Ikigai but face setbacks. Take heart surgeons, for instance, undoubtedly skilled, well-paid and indispensable, but the love for their work may vary. Despite initial genuine passion, their erratic schedules and the burden of literally holding their patients' lives in their hands can take a toll, and only gets worse as their inevitable failings, and thus deaths of patients, will only build up over time. This is why you should tread lightly when identifying your Ikigai and pursuing your future career. But what exactly should I do to implement Ikigai, I hear you say? I'd suggest starting off by asking yourself what you're good at, Because if you're good at something, you'll learn to love it, use it to benefit society, and it's highly likely you can make money from it, unless it's an absurd skill, like being able to gurn for 53 seconds. If Ikigai leaves you with more questions than answers, then I'd suggest reading the questions in this article from BetterUp, where I sourced the graph and data, link in the description. After you've addressed all the relevant questions and have a rough idea of your desired line of work, there are 3 paths to consider. Fully embracing a traditional job that aligns with your Ikigai, becoming self-employed, or finding a combination of both. Logic dictates the latter of the 3 is the more sensible option, as you can keep your main job, but at the same time, you can experiment with being fully self-employed, without risking anything other than a portion of your spare time and money. Consider a scenario where you're a dissatisfied school teacher, feeling unappreciated in your role, and with a low pay. To alleviate this, you can, for example, be an online tutor, start an online course, or make a YouTube channel where you teach a topic of your choosing. Let's say you started an online course. The students who applied to your course are likely to express their gratitude, as they would actually be motivated to learn the topic you teach. Meanwhile, you can continue with your existing teaching job, whilst earning a significant additional income each month from said course, provided it has enough demand. You can also find a way to monetize your leisure activities, provided you are good at them. Let's say you're a good painter or a creative one. You can sell paintings to people on Etsy where you aren't making enough to quit your main job, but will net you an extra $100 per month. This could get you an extra nice holiday, let's say to a distant tropical beach, only to write a review complaining that it's, quote, too sandy. These examples may not be the best as I merely pulled them off the top of my head, but I'm sure if you did research, you'll likely find markets which are less saturated or find solutions to thrive in the big markets. Anyway, when you dip your hands into a side job, there is always the opportunity to expand and grow. In other words, if you are this Etsy artist in theory, there's a decent chance that you'll go from making $100 per month to 1,000, perhaps even going upwards of 10K per month, by which point you can quit your main job, replacing it with something that provides near-perfect Ikigai.
Finish him!
If you choose the path of self-employment, mastering the fundamentals of mindset, business management, marketing, and organization is crucial. On nichepursuits.com, link below, there's an article listing highly rated books that cover these topics and that I'd recommend. If I'm being honest, I haven't read all of them, but the handful of books I have read, such as Outliers, The Lean Startup, and The 4-Hour Workweek, have all provided me with invaluable knowledge, as well as effective frameworks for solving tough problems. The best part about non-fiction books is you don't necessarily have to buy and read them, as a quick online search will reveal thousands of articles or videos summarizing their content for free. I do recommend reading the books, however, be it in their physical form, digital, or as audiobooks, as they have a ton of useful and interesting case studies and examples that often aren't covered in the free online summaries. Be wary though, as some authors may have questionable credibility. Take for example, Robert Kiyosaki, author of the best-selling book Rich Dad Poor Dad, who, as it turns out, is most likely a fraud. Annoyingly, Rich Dad Poor Dad is featured on the #1 spot on the Niche Pursuits list, as well as nearly all non-fiction lists on the internet. But you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as the saying goes. Moving on, there are 3 main ways you can make money by being self-employed, either through the traditional route of a brick-and-mortar business, by starting an online business, or by being a content creator. The only real difference between content creators and online business owners lies in their revenue sources. Content creators, often present on platforms like YouTube or TikTok, earn money indirectly through ads and sponsors. On the other hand, online business owners generate income by selling their own products, such as online courses or with print-on-demand services. If you can't think of a decent low-barrier-to-entry form of self-employment, I highly recommend reading Blue Ocean Strategy or Blue Ocean Shift. Though I haven't read Blue Ocean Strategy, both books talk of methods you can use to create new markets in what the authors call the Blue Ocean, as opposed to competing in existing markets, i.e. the Red Ocean. Take, for example, Netflix, which started out by mailing DVDs to people who ordered online, so they don't have to waste time or energy commuting to the nearest blockbuster. Netflix then, of course, shifted their focus to pioneering the streaming service, allowing their customers to access thousands of movies and TV shows, all online, with a cheap monthly subscription, and the rest, as they say, is history. We can also see blue ocean markets being formed by content creators, such as with Mr. Beast, who popularized the philanthropy scene, and by making grandiose videos, such as Squid Game in real life, reaching over 500 million views in the process. The great thing about starting a successful business is you'll be rewarded with a passive income. There are two types of income: active and passive. With active, you have to work a certain amount of time to be paid, usually in hours, whereas passive income flows into your bank account, whether you are physically working or not. Take, for example, Mariah Carey, who makes a whopping $3 million a year from All I Want for Christmas Is You, a song that came out in 1994. You know, the one that gets blasted on every mall or supermarket 24/7 as soon as Halloween ends, giving their workers a Vietnam flashback. Joking aside, Carey is just one of millions fortunate enough to make double the average person's monthly salary every time they sleep. You of course have to work hundreds or thousands of hours to achieve something like this, but at the same time, it is nigh impossible to reach this level of money if you only work in one or two active income jobs. If you are a content creator or an online business owner, fortunate enough to live exclusively off passive income, it will free you from being forced to work in one location, as you can work wherever you want and whenever you want, provided you have an internet connection and a laptop to work. In his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, Tim Ferriss, an American entrepreneur and best-selling author who lives off numerous streams of passive income, talks off taking mini-retirements, where instead of taking a traditional holiday, he would temporarily move to somewhere abroad to take 1 month to 6 months off, whilst he lived in a rented apartment. As it turns out, it is cheaper to rent an apartment for a month than it is to take the average week holiday to an all-inclusive hotel. If you worked in a more traditional job with active income, and you asked your boss to do this, he'd either laugh in your face or say that you're fired. Needless to say, being self-employed provides a lot more than simply achieving Ikigai. If it were that easy, why isn't everyone doing it? You've probably heard this a million times before and felt like a fool whenever people have said this. But let's suppose 90% of every would-be self-employed person suddenly thought like this, told themselves that they've came to their senses and quit to get a realistic job. There is a decent chance that they are in fact correct, but at the same time, the 10% who weren't affected with this mindset will all be at a huge advantage, as there will be way less competition, and have their slices of the pie, very large slices, which could have easily been shared among the other 90%. This is an example of the Tinkerbell effect, where the more people believe in something, the more it becomes a reality. Of course, all forms of self-employment are far from easy, but despite this, the odds are stacked against you, simply because the average person is held back by these flawed self-limiting beliefs. You can see for yourself online the numerous cases of famous people where they were criticized for their ideas, but in the end, they proved their critics wrong. Take, for example, the Beatles, who were rejected by record labels again and again, with some harsh responses being, "Guitar groups are on their way out, and the Beatles have no future in show business." Provided you don't let self-limiting beliefs spread by others sabotage your efforts, then the very act of thinking of a plan and following it in the hope of reaching your goal will give you a huge advantage. This doesn't even take into account the people who tried but gave up at their first hurdle, the people who did research for 10 minutes and believed themselves to be an expert, and so on. Provided you are stubborn with your goals but flexible in your methods, and you commit yourself to lifelong learning, you will be 1,000 times more likely to achieve your goals than the average person. Remember that nothing is safe in this world. There's a decent chance you'll fail trying to get a realistic job, and so you are better off taking risks that benefit you now and in your future. It's important to acknowledge as well that, although you may know all of this, Knowing and doing are two different things. You may say to yourself that you'll get thing X done by time Y, but you need to actively push yourself and push away the temptations of instant gratification or putting it off till tomorrow, as you'll likely say the same thing when tomorrow happens. There is never going to be the right time. An old Chinese proverb goes, "The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now." The journey to achieving your ideal job won't be a walk in the park. In fact, many people who have found success will tell you that their journeys to success were single-handedly the most stressful period in their lives. It seems inevitable that you will experience great failure, dozens of things going wrong at the same time without warning. Chances are you'll lose people close to you, and with all this going on, you'll have a creeping sense of incompetence, aka imposter syndrome, which you would think would go away after reaching your main goals, but as it turns out, the opposite seems to be true. Despite this, surely it isn't nearly as bad as our grandparents who slaved away most of their lives working in a lifeless 9-to-5 job just to make ends meet, up until their deaths. Ironically, many of these people who stuck to the traditional path may have mocked and belittled those attempting to break the status quo, as most of them would have suffered from the delusion that their working lives were the most realistic and best they could have achieved. If you were once belittled by them, remember that many, if not all, have unwittingly sacrificed themselves to the dark Lord Moloch. I'll leave you with a quote that's origins are unknown, but I think is quite relevant to the video. It goes like this. "Someone once told me the definition of hell. On your last day on earth, the person you became will meet with the person you could have become."